And we are live. Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Level Up Live. I am Dr. Sharita Gaskins Tillett. I am your host, and I am ecstatic about tonight's guest. I can't wait to share her with you. But while we're waiting for other folks to come in, I just want to remind you to say hi in the comments if you're watching live. Please post your questions. If you're watching the replay, hashtag replay, and still post your questions because I will pass them along and try to get them answered for you. Also, just a reminder that registration is still open for a weekend for me, the premier wellness experience for professional women. So check out the website, www.aweekendforme.com. You do not want to miss this. It's going to be in Puerto Rico, November 2nd through 5th, and I simply cannot wait. And looking forward to seeing you there. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with our guest. I'm going to introduce her. I'm, like I said, super excited to have her with us tonight. We have Dr. Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. She is widely known for her ability to catalyze immediate and profound shifts in high achieving couples who want it all: genuine emotional connection, sensual passion, and erotic intimacy. A physician, coach, and intimate marriage expert, Dr. Alexandra is the best selling author of Uncompromising Intimacy, the host of the Intimate Marriage podcast, as well as a wife of 27 years and a mother of four. Couples who work with her discover the key to passion, fulfillment, intimacy, and success isn't compromise, it's being unwilling to compromise. Because when both people feel free to be themselves, the relationship is juicy, erotically alive, and deeply nourishing. For over 20 years, Dr. Alexandra has shown men and women how to bring pleasure and purpose into all aspects of their relationship, from the daily grind of running a household to intimate communication and ecstatic experiences in the bedroom, all while achieving extraordinary professional results. High performing individuals who are successful in their careers but can't say the same for their romantic relationships work with her to create the quality of relationship they long for. She offers private relationship and intimacy coaching, group programs, and independent study courses. Dr. Alexandra has been featured in the Huffington Post, Rolling Stone, USA Today, Cosmopolitan, Business Insider, Thrive Global, Mind Body Green, Fox News New York City, and LA Weekly Magazine named her one of the top 10 dating and relationship experts to watch in 2023. Welcome, Dr. Alexandra. How are you?
I'm well. I'm so glad to be here. And I have to say that that was a wonderful introduction. And I feel like the red carpet was rolled out before the introduction began when you talk about a weekend for me. I love the name of your retreat. It just like has me relax and open up. I just think any conversation that follows you're talking about a weekend for me, it has to be a good conversation.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I'm glad that the name resonates with you. And it's meant to be just that, a weekend for women. It's just for them because we tend to be the caregivers, and we take on a lot of responsibilities, and we put ourselves at the bottom of the list. And so I appreciate you
Yeah,
saying that. Go ahead.
absolutely. And, as you've said, the name of my book is Uncompromising Intimacy. And I have a lot to say about the problems with compromise. And one of the important pieces in the evolution of my methods and just my awareness and then being able to help other people was I remember when I have four children. This was just before starting my internship, and I had an infant and a 2-year-old. And I remember opening this book in the bookstore, and and basically in the forward or the introduction, it said it was about family, for to ask yourself the question, what does everybody need right now, including me? And I was a
Mm,
whiz with what everybody needs right now. No question. The baby, the toddler, the husband, we didn't have a dog. It seems like that belongs in that sentence. But the point is that, like, I knew what everybody needed. But when I read including me, I just burst into tears. Like,
Wow.
oh, I never thought to ask that. And, I knew when I needed, well, I didn't always, but like I was going to say, I knew I needed to eat dinner, for example, but there's something
Sure.
about what does everybody in this family need right now? That was the question, including me, that just shone this light in an area that for me was completely dark and unconscious. And so I know the name of your retreat, like I've encountered it before you just said it. But whenever I hear a weekend for me, it just in this really tender way brings me right back to that question. What does everyone in this family need right now, including me? Because it just really
Yeah.
took courage to answer, including me. And then I'll just fast forward a bunch of time. Then the real art and the thing that has fascinated me ever since is how do I answer both parts of the question? Because it's just so much easier to focus on what other people need.
Yes.
And then the initial pivot, not like right at the beginning, but once I get enough courage and into it, it's like, okay, what do I need? But I didn't want to stay only in the what do I need, even though it's an important phase, whether it's moments or years or whatever, it's an important phase. But then to really be able to, in any given moment, be attuned to the answer. What does everyone in this family need right now, including me? So I'm
Yeah.
never putting others behind and I'm never putting myself behind. And I think since you asked, is anything off topic, I'm going to take that as an invitation to talk very broadly. It's a little bit like the sexual act of 69. People like to say, oh, it's so amazing, but it's incredibly difficult to do. It's just so hard to really have your attention on your partner's genitals and really be able to provide pleasure while also simultaneously being able to genuinely relax and receive pleasure. I mean, we don't need to get so sexual about it. That's just a very
Yeah. Yeah.
explicit version of the art of being able to really allow ourselves to have what we want and need without becoming closed off and self-centered or overly indulgent.
Right.
Because I wanna continue to take care of my family and attend to everyone's needs, but without sacrificing my own, even one
Right.
iota.
And that's the thing, we have a tendency, well, I like to say we have an epidemic of self neglect going on right
Yes,
now,
yes.
especially among professional women. And so I think that's why what you do is so vitally important. So I do want to back up a little bit because,
Okay,
we
yes,
kind
I
of
know, I dove right in.
jump right in
Skip the
because, we
foreplay,
like to
which I
say,
don't believe in.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Sorry, I just said, yes, I skipped the foreplay, and I don't believe in doing that. So let's calibrate and go back to wherever you wanna
Okay.
begin.
All right. Yeah. No, so what I usually start with, and we don't have to, follow a script at all. This is just our conversation. But I usually start by asking about your journey through medicine. Just very briefly, did you always want to be a physician? How did you come to choose your chosen field? Are you still practicing right now? And then, we'll transition some into your current work.
Okay, that sounds good. So I have always been interested in everything. And in fact, I was just thinking earlier today, it's so funny you asked me this question. The thing I wanted to be when I was a child was a spy. And I wanted to be the kind of spy where I'd wear luxurious clothing and, speak 7 languages and be
And do the
able to.
tango. Why can I see this? But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, like, I wanted to be a female James Bond, Not the violence, that it wasn't the weapons, it was more the weapons of intellect and intrigue and strategy and being a real lady and very charming and able to use that for the good of my people. Like, that was the thing that I thought was so exciting. So, I just was thinking about this earlier today. It's the first time I ever made the connection, because in many ways, I do feel like a sleuth when I meet a couple, because I always know, once I get to a certain level of depth, I know what the root cause is, and then it's very straightforward to attend to it. The challenge is in identifying what the root cause is. But anyway, going back to your question. So I always wanted to learn about everything, and it seemed painful to pick a major in college because it would be narrowing
Yes.
my field of study. I like depth. It's not that I was a dilettante, but I really have very broad interests. And then I think when I was a junior in college, I thought, I then knew I wanted to go into medicine, but it seemed like it's so narrow. And then I got to medical school and I realized, no, there actually are so many different ways. And so, in terms of professionally, I didn't really decide until I was halfway through college. But I do want to say that my mother, when she was a student at Pembroke before it became Brown, she met Martin Luther King Jr. there while he came to speak before he was so well known, when she was a freshman. And I was in ninth grade when his birthday was made a national holiday. And my mother was clear there was no way that we were going to honor this man by lying around on the couch eating popcorn. And so she arranged for her and me to volunteer at this holistic nursing home where I got to take care of, I mean, I didn't think of them as my patients. So that's
Sure.
like a whole mindset. And I ended up volunteering there in all of my vacations throughout the rest of high school. So I didn't think about it as a career, but it was something that opened my heart at a very early age to be able to serve people in their time of need, let's say. So I went to medical school. I met my husband the very first week, and I had my first child at the end of my third year of medical school, at a
Oh,
time
wow.
when I didn't actually know any medical students who were parents, except this one man who had a very traditional marriage. And so his wife had the baby and was staying home. And it really didn't impact him, as far as I could tell, in terms of studies or whatever. Like, he still spent the same amount of time studying and had his attention there. And then I had my second child just before my internship. And I practiced for, well, let's see, about 7 years, I think. And then I took a sabbatical. And the reason I took a sabbatical was because I realized that, as far back as I could remember in my adulthood, everything I did was a means to an end. Even going on vacation with my family. But, I worked hard in school in order to get the grades, in order to apply, like, just everything, even though it was meaningful, it was always for some other purpose. And I felt like I lost touch with just being in the present moment, and I couldn't really figure out how to make it work. And another piece of this is that I realized I was prioritizing my patients over my family and my family over myself. And it wasn't a time management issue. And this was 2005, 2006. People weren't talking about burnout back then.
Right.
And so I went on sabbatical, and basically I never went back. I did some insurance, physical, I did different things for a while, just some like easy doctor money, but I don't have a license anymore and I don't practice anymore. My full-time work is as a relationship and intimacy coach.
So how did you get there? And I've actually started reading your book, so I know some of the story. But tell us how you made that transition into intimacy coaching. What was your aha moment? How did you realize that this was even a need?
Well, when I took the sabbatical, I needed to start small. I had no idea where to start. So I sat by the river near our house. I took a painting class, and I did reconnect with my joy. I learned how to know what I needed too, like the question we were saying earlier. And I got to where I felt like not every minute of every day, but overall, my whole life had a lot more sunshine and kind of spontaneity, presence. I was able to enjoy the life that I had. I didn't change any of the outer details. I was in the same house with the same husband and the same children, going to the same school, but I had a lot more gratification in the life I was living. And the one area where that wasn't the case, where it didn't just translate, was in the bedroom. And prior to that, I had the idea that, because we met in medical school and then had babies and residency training and so forth, I thought, well, once we have time, once we're basically at home weekends and evenings, then of course my husband and I love one another. We're attracted to one another. Like, we're going to experience what the poets describe because we'll finally have time for it. And so actually it was about 10 years into our relationship that we weren't working nights or weekends. He was very occasionally on call, but essentially not. And I realized it's not just more time that we needed, that it was going to take something else. I didn't know what at first to ignite the spark and let our love be expressed in erotic ways. Like, I didn't question the love we had for one another. It's just that it flowed more easily when we were parenting and making logistical decisions. And it's like it didn't flow so easily. And it took a lot before I could admit this to myself. And then it took even more time before I could bring this up to him. So in this whole context, I decided to take a very in-depth training in sensuality and sexuality. And the training was for somebody like me, just wanting to heat things up and know how to sustain that for the rest of my life. And it doubled as a coach training. But at the time, I didn't even know what a coach was. Like, that was not a thing for me. Like, I thought of like overweight Russian men and figure skaters or football coaches. I just didn't know anything about the coaching world. But I am curious, as I said before. And so once I was already there, I thought, well, I'll just go to the teaching lab to see what it's like. And then I just knew I'd come home, and so much of what I loved about practicing medicine and being with people at a time that is so meaningful, but being able to really contribute to health and well-being in a very different way than my clinical practice had ever made possible. And so I dove all the way in to build on my personal experience, my professional experience, and become masterful in serving people in this area, which is so complicated. Although I've come really to think about the sensual, sexual side of a relationship as kind of a litmus test for where the relationship really is, which takes me into the conversation about compromise. But I don't know if you'd like to say something first.
Well, I guess first I'd like to applaud you for not just staying where you were, because you talk about that in your book some, and you mentioned, I think it was that most, I don't know, I don't remember the statistic, but that couples spend about 4 minutes per day discussing
Less than 4 minutes.
less than 4 minutes a day discussing things that are not child related and logistical, and that's really scary. But I think it's very brave of you and very proactive to actually do something about it and to do the research and now to bring those your learning to other people. So I just wanted to applaud you for that piece of it.
Well, I just want to say thank you for that. And there are more aspects to my story, and one that I'll just mention, which you do know from the book as well, is that my parents were divorced, my husband's parents were divorced, and my parents did not have like a big dramatic violent ending. The first year after my parents got divorced, my father came for dinner on Thursday nights. Like, they did their best to make it harmonious, but it was profoundly devastating for me. And I really had the question when I got married, is it possible to have a really great relationship? Because I didn't know anyone. I mean, my grandparents were married for 50 years, but it was a totally different era. And so I really did have the question, are we going to be able to be married for a long time? And I knew it wasn't just going to naturally happen. It was going to the only chance we had was by becoming intentional.
Yeah, yeah. So now tell me, so you did this work for yourself, but then what made you transition to creating your blueprint and sharing this with the rest of the world?
Well, the training that I did was very edgy and far out, and I didn't tell anyone necessarily that I was married, I had children, I was a doctor, because it just wasn't the scene. It was like I did the equivalent of cardiothoracic surgery residency in the realm of sensual. Like, I was like, I don't want it to be dehydrated and clinical. I really want to get this training. So I did some very, and then I would translate it because I would go home to the suburbs, be a soccer mom. And the interesting thing to me is that people started asking me to coach them. People wanted me to coach them on their relationship, on communication, on things that I actually never said anything about, but people could just, I don't even know if it was conscious, but they were drawn to me. And so really the thing that inspired me was my initial clients. And I just was so fired up at how much more is possible than people actually believe. And so I don't know if this is really answering your question, but this is not something where I made a vision board. It's not something where I set my goals. Okay, in 3 years, I'm going to be a coach charging this much with this many clients. There was none of that. It was really, how can I serve? In terms of my heart, it was very, very similar to what led me into medicine. It's just a very different way of working with people. And I just kept taking the next step. And the whole process really, like the way revealed itself is, I guess, what I want to say. And another part of that is that I grew in the process. And so every step of the way, I've been really grateful for my own growth, because I used to be a very, very private person. I didn't, you know, you never could have convinced me that I would openly share about my sex life on social media, but I do it because there's a lack of role models, and I'm sharing things that if there had been someone to learn it from, I would have learned it from them. So
Yeah,
I know it's
I
not.
think that's one of the things that really struck me too in the book is that you mentioned that when you started the coaching, you used to ask your clients to name a couple whose relationship they admire, and almost nobody could name anyone to the point where you stopped asking the question. And so I think that really does speak to the condition of a lot of our relationships. And I do think that, you talk about that prioritization and how the patients come first and the family comes next, and there's nowhere for you, but oftentimes there's nowhere for the relationship either. Um, in that whole hierarchy. And so tell us, how do you help us to make it a priority to make our yeah, I kind of know the answer, but I want you to tell the folks, how do you help us make our relationship a priority?
Well, um I'll be intrigued if this is what you thought I was going to say, but the thing that comes, like, it's a very complex topic, but the thing that comes to mind right now is that I think it's really necessary to think about what the purpose of your marriage is. Because if the purpose of your marriage is to have children, then that's really, I mean, that's great. If that, if you have children, that is wonderful. I don't in any way mean to diminish it, but that is not what is going to result in passionate, meaningful, nourishing connection for decades. If your purpose is to make things simpler financially, that also, like, so many of the traditional reasons for marriage are like enough to share a home together, but they're not enough to feel alive, to really prioritize the relationship. So what I think is one of the most important things, and there are different ways to say it, no one needs to use the language I'm about to use, but there's a version that can be meaningful for any person. And that is to look at the relationship as the ultimate vehicle for personal growth. And so if you think of your marriage as a duty or a burden or any kind of a should that you need to adjust to, that will get old. That will build resentment in anyone who really is self-honoring. But if you look at it as an opportunity for growth and connection, then you can, then there's less of this either or. I think we fall into a trap thinking about, oh, this is what I do for me and this is what I do for the relationship. That is a trap which is not going to serve. How can this relationship be for you? And I think one way to get there, because I always like to have it, like, we're talking about something which is specific, but it also can sound vague. So to be super practical, there are times where I'll encourage someone to say, okay, well, what would be good for the relationship? And that may or may not be the same answer to what would be good for you right now. But that is a totally different set of questions than what does your partner need? Like, if we're all adults, you don't really need to be asking, what does your partner need? But you do want to ask, what does the relationship need? And I guess I just want to add one more thing in the context of your beautiful work, which is that I'm a really big fan of self-care, but I think people often think of self-care as being for the self. And of course it is, but self-care is one of the very best things that you can do for your marriage. Like, you nourished and joyful and generous with a full cup is good for your marriage. So when I say, what does the marriage need? I don't mean necessarily that you spend time together. It could be what the marriage needs is for you to go into the bathroom, lock the door, and take a 3-hour bath. That could be what your marriage needs.
Right, right. Because it's hard to give when you don't have anything. When you're coming from a place of being depleted. And that's what so many people, I think, fail to recognize. They just give and give and give, and they think it's selfish to take time to replenish, when in fact it's not. But now tell me, what do you say to those couples who have given up? Because you talk about how your marriage was, and I think a lot of marriages are, they become routine and comfortable, and no one's angry with anyone else. You're great co-parents, you're really good friends, but the spark isn't there. What do you say to those folks who have pretty much given up and say, well, we have all these positives in our relationship, no one's interested in divorcing, but but they're just kind of accepting that the spark isn't there and won't be there? What do you say to them?
The main thing I say is listen up, because I understand why you've drawn that conclusion. In fact, most of my clients have never worked with a coach or therapist before because they didn't think there was anything better than what they have until they hear me talk. So your question is really a beautiful question. And the main thing that I would say is that far and away, the most common relationship advice that's given is to compromise. And when we compromise, we essentially prioritize our partner being comfortable and therefore don't connect with and express our own desires, our own truth, even our challenges. And if you're in the situation that you've described very beautifully, where, you love one another, you get along, your marriage is good, but the spark is gone, and, well, at least you have someone you enjoy spending time with. It just doesn't have to be that way. But the main way to pivot it is to honor yourself and become more self-expressed. So when I talk about uncompromising intimacy, I'm not talking about you always getting your own way. That's not what uncompromising means in the way that I use it, because that's just in the direction of narcissism and a lack of consideration. And I'm never advocating that. But where compromise is when we hold back who we are just to keep the peace, not to ruffle feathers, not to have to deal with something complicated or hurt feelings or anger or whatever, that instead you become uncompromising in the sense of bringing all of who you are to the relationship, not leaving any part outside when you walk in the door of your home. And that is an art, to learn to share all of who you are in a way that your partner can receive it and be open to receive all of who they are. And so for the couple that you've described, where the spark is gone and things are seemingly good enough, the big invitation that I am extending is that you look at what you're withholding. I don't mean a lie, I don't mean a secret, but are you going out as often as you want to go out? Are you staying home as often as you want to stay home? Are you eating? Are you ordering what you want to eat? Are you sharing what's inside you in the way that would actually feel good to you? And most often, we're so used to just tolerating things that we don't actually know exactly what we want. And if that's the case, just start small. Just notice, is there any time where you don't say something because it's just simpler not to? Well, if that's the case, I'm not inviting a complaining fest, not at all. I just love the notion that inside every complaint is hidden a desire. So it's totally fine if you're watching and this is speaking to you, make a list of your complaints about what you're not experiencing in your marriage and take every single one and turn it into a desire. So if the complaint is, heteronormatively speaking, he doesn't pay attention to me, then the desire is, I want more attention. I want a deeper conversation, whatever your desire is. But it's fine to start with the complaints. That's what we usually have access to first. But then turn it into a desire and start with the one that's the easiest to say and express it to your spouse without accusation, without blame. If you're thinking it's his fault that it's this way, then what I'm saying is not going to work. That is just an old-fashioned attack. And if the option is an attack or compromise, compromise could be the better option. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying share your experience with vulnerability. It's one thing to say, I wish you'd pay more attention when I'm speaking. It's another thing to say, when I'm speaking with you and you don't listen, I feel really unimportant and like I'm invisible. and I really want to be a full participant in our communications. The response from a spouse to that is night and day compared to, I wish you would pay more attention to me. And yes, I'm distinguishing with my tone. That's a very important part. But also the words I'm using, I'm taking full responsibility for what my experience is, sharing it, saying I want it to be different, and not in any way blaming him for not having done things differently, especially if I haven't said it before.
Right. And it sounds like you're really talking about honoring ourselves at a higher level than I think most of us do. Because in your words, I hear authenticity, that you want people to really be unapologetically authentic with who they are and what they desire for themselves and for the relationship. And I think that for a lot of professional women, especially again, because we take care of other people and prioritize other people all the time, we don't even sit to think about what we want. What
Yes,
what
so
what do I
true.
really want? Because I'm so busy thinking about what everybody else needs. And so it's hard to, what am I trying to say? It's hard to even articulate that to a partner because you don't know yourself what you want.
I think you've said that so beautifully, and really for an overworked, stressed out professional woman, the place to start is just every day write down 2 or 3 desires. And if you're listening, you might say, well, what does that do? That just makes me frustrated that it's not happening. Okay, maybe it does. But if you get in the habit of every day writing down 2 or 3 desires, it will gently and assuredly start to shift you from the inside, because it is a self-honoring process. And it just does so many things. First of all, you'll recognize opportunities for your desires to come true in a way you wouldn't have if you didn't know what your desires are. And when I say desires, I don't mean like a trip to, I mean, I do mean a trip to Paris, but I also mean the perfect amount of milk in your coffee, or to have 5 minutes to myself in the morning. Like big desires, little desires, it really doesn't matter. They all come from the same internal part of you, where your desire helps you be more connected with yourself. And so that is a great place to start. And once you do know what you want, then you can bring it up. And it means that if, for example, you thought your husband was going to do the dishes last night and you get up in the morning and they're still in the sink, you could say your desire is for the dishes to be done, but most of the time that's not the deepest desire. The deepest desire is that you can trust your partner to follow through on their word, or your desire is not to feel taken for granted, but to have your desire honored when your desire was that the dishes would be done. Like there is a deeper thing which creates connection out of the dissatisfaction in a way that keeping things more superficial doesn't tend to.
Right, right. Now, so you talk about, figuring out what you as an individual want. Now, transitioning to the relationship itself, how do you, if you're sensing that this is how your relationship is, that you would like it to be at another level, but right now it's just not, how do you approach your spouse with that? Or your partner? What do maybe they're not even of the same mind. Maybe they think everything's fine. So how do you begin to have those conversations?
Again, what I'm going to say is going to sound so simple, and all I have to say is don't knock it till you try it. And that is to cultivate curiosity. In my book, I describe 6 qualities, and the first one is cultivate curiosity. And it is always the place to start because it's really fairly easy to implement and often isn't present in a relationship where the spark is missing. So if you think back to the feeling of being in love, you're just filled with curiosity. Where is that scar from? And what was your favorite vegetable when you were a child? And if you didn't have this profession, what would it be? And if we didn't live here, where would you want to live? And like, what is your favorite book? And what did you want to be when you grew up? Like, we just, part of feeling in love is just being fascinated by our partner. And then things become more stable, more familiar, and that's beautiful. I'm not looking to take away that feeling of safety and security and steadfast connection. However, it doesn't need to come at the cost of the curiosity. So you can start by asking your partner any open-ended question. That's a question that doesn't have a yes or no answer. One second. And listen generously to the answer. So the question can be whimsical, it can be serious, it can be spiritual, it can be his memories, it can be anything. So you can ask your partner, what was the highlight of last week? Or if we could be anywhere right now, where would it be? If you could have dinner with any celebrity, alive or dead, who would it be and what would you want to talk about? If you could star in a movie, which one would it be? I mean, really, if you have more humor in your relationship, start with something funny. If spiritual conversations are more accessible, ask something biblical. The point is just to open up the conversation and essentially invite some aspect of your partner to be present in the marriage, which is otherwise closed to you and unavailable because you never asked and you never took the time to really receive the answer. And what naturally happens, of course, is that things arise inside you. And if your partner doesn't then ask you the questions too, feel free to just go ahead and share your answer. This doesn't need to be some kind of legalized format where, opposing counsel needs to ask a question too. No, just it can be conversational. And after you ask that question, then give an answer. And is that everything to light up passion for the rest of your lives? No, but does it go a very significant way of the, distance? It certainly does. And I once gave a lecture where I talked about this, and there was a woman in the audience who had a great marriage. She'd been married for 32 years, and she didn't actually plan to come hear me talk. She came for the lecturer who was after me and just arrived early. So she thought, okay, well, I'll listen. And so she went home and she asked her husband of 32 years a question or two, and she contacted me the next day. She said, I was just so surprised. I just asked a few open-ended questions. We had the most beautiful conversation. We felt closer than we'd felt in 5 years, and I didn't think there was anything wrong before then. And they went on to make love, and it had just a different connected flavor to it. So it seems so simple, but cultivating curiosity, making that part of your marital culture, there will always be new things to learn if you invite them in and share of yourself.
So now thinking about the statistic that we talked about before, that less than 4 minutes a day on other kinds of conversation, and then what you just shared now, it almost seems that the root of the disconnection is caught up in communication. Do you think that's accurate? Is that people stop communicating at a deeper level, and that's where the disconnection comes in?
It depends how sophisticated the question is. One of my answers is yes, I do. And another answer is that I think when things feel settled, we turn our attention to work, to other whatever is calling for our attention. And so it's a bit of a mindset shift away from nurturing the relationship because it seems like it's settled. It doesn't need it anymore. And I actually posted on social media recently about this, that so many things in life, if we don't give them attention, they come knocking, they find us. The crisis will come. If we just check out at work, at least for physicians and any high level professional, there are consequences. And if we just don't really nurture our kids, there are consequences. But we tend to have it be normalized that we put our marriage on the back burner because the other person's an adult, he's going to be okay. Well, actually, for the people that I serve, it's not that, oh, they're going to end up on their way to divorce. That obviously does happen. But the thing that I think is such a travesty is the epidemic we have of conflict-free, passion-free relationships, just the kind of relationship that you described so beautifully. And so it's not just a kind of inadequacy in the communication. It's more of an inner turning away because it doesn't need us anymore, that then results in less attention and intention, including in communication.
Okay. All right. Well, I have very much enjoyed our conversation tonight. We are running out of time, but I do want you to tell us, if we're interested in working with you, how can we find you?
Well, since we're here in your wonderful Facebook group and Level Up Lady Doc, is that what it's called? Yes. Okay. I knew it was Level Up. Okay. So since we're here in Level Up Lady Doc and also YouTube, you can certainly find me on social media. I'm on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and so forth. But and anyone is welcome to send me a DM. But the thing that I would say is find me on my Facebook, on my website, alexandrastockwell.com. And if you go there, you can find links to all the social media as well as download the first chapter of my book for free.
And the podcast, don't forget the podcast.
And the podcast, the Intimate Marriage Podcast. Yes, I'm in the top 100. I go up and down the numbers, but I'm in the top 100 of iTunes because I put out a podcast every week, and it's called the Intimate Marriage Podcast, and every single episode is like this conversation, whether it's solo or with guests, talking about sort of the big picture and also very practical ways to evolve and enjoy your relationship more.
But I think that, again, the fact that your podcast is so popular underscores the fact that this is a big problem. It really is an issue that is not often addressed. So thank you again for what you do and for addressing it and helping to bring intimacy back back to relationships.
Thank you so much, and thank you for valuing it. I'm so grateful that it's an important topic in your world too.
Absolutely. It's essential to self-care. We talked about that. So now I usually like to end on the same question or a variation of the same question. And so if there's one single best thing that you could recommend to a professional woman who wants to up-level her intimacy, the intimacy in her marriage, what would that be?
To believe that it's possible. Because the main thing that I encounter when I speak with people is they just don't think it's possible. And I really want to emphasize it absolutely is. If that's not what you're experiencing, it's because you've never received the education on how to do it. It is totally possible. I know we're winding up, so I won't talk about the couples I know that, that have been together for 50 years, and so much is possible if you just get the education and implement it in a very delightful way. It's not work, it's just intention.
Oh, there you have it. Well, thank you again so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us. Please, guys, check out her website, check out the podcast, read the book. Again, a big problem for a lot of marriages, and we thank you for helping us. So that's it
Thank
for
you so
tonight.
much.
Yes, that's it for tonight. We will see you all again next week. Don't forget, register for A Weekend for Me, www.aweekendforme.com. Registration's open. I've actually am extending early bird pricing for a couple more weeks because I've been on vacation. I haven't been communicating with you guys as much, and I want to give everybody a chance to get in. All righty, take care. Have a great night.